Hello, everyone. I'm Katrina Rainin-Woodward, and I have the great privilege of being Program Director and Principal Consultant at Melbourne Business School's Executive Education. I'd like to warmly welcome you all, staff, students, alumni, and guests, to the Lunchtime Masterclass series program, Generative AI, Unlocked, Real Benefits, Real Risks. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we are today, and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, past and present. I also pay my respect to their communities and elders who've shared and practiced their teaching over thousands of years. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ongoing leadership and contribution to business, education, industry, and society. Those of you who've been along the journey with us will recall that Melbourne Business School's vision is unleashing leaders for a sustainable future. And we do this by creating and sharing knowledge to help understand, guide, and shape the future of business, government, and for the for-purpose sector. I think of what is Gen AI as the leadership question of our times. Everyone seems to know everything about Gen AI, but we're always behind. As Ujwal explained, there are weekly changes in the field. It makes you wonder what happened this morning in the field of Gen AI. Events like today's masterclass offer ongoing learning and access to contemporary thinking in business and leadership, and it's one of the many ways of supporting the school's commitment to lifelong learning. If you have questions throughout our session today, please remember to drop them in the Q&A box. We'll ensure we leave time at the end of the session to cover these. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Professor Ujwal Kayande. Ujwal has had a long affiliation with this school. In fact, he founded the Centre for Business Analytics and was its director from 2014 to 2021. During 2022 to 24, Ujwal was the Dean of the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University, Canada. And well, lucky for us, he returned to the school earlier this year. Ujwal teaches in our MBA and Exec Ed programs and currently serves as an advisor to L'Oreal and other global firms. With such an illustrious career, we're very excited to be hearing from him today. So over to you, Ujwal.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Really appreciate that introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here speaking with the Melbourne Business School community once again. And we've got alumni in the room, we've got students in the room, and we've got a whole host of corporate partners in the room with whom we work to deliver our programs. So I'm really thrilled. And I've also looked through the names of people who've registered, and I see a number of my very good friends whom I worked with for a number of years. So really thrilled to have all of you in the room to hear me speak about generative AI, unlocked, real benefits, and real risks. I want to start by taking you through an example of generative AI and what it can do. And I'm taking you through this example because I'm closely involved with the development of the product as well as an advisor. And this is a company called brandcoms.ai, which is out of Melbourne, founded by Forethought, which is a marketing analytics company in Melbourne. And effectively, they've created a Gen AI platform for effective advertising. I just want to show you that because there's a context to why I'm showing you what they can create. And I want to start off by showing you an ad that's been created with their generative AI platform. Of course, the ad is not created in a vacuum. This is not about technical competency. It's also about the ad being more effective. But let's have a look at the ad first before I talk about whether it is effective or not. And Katrina, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound, please. Okay, great.
Welcome to the kingdom of Starbucks, where loyal sippers get the royal treatment. For Lady Brittany and her bestie, we have a grande iced caramel macchiato, extra shot of espresso, oat milk, light ice, 5 pumps of vanilla, double caramel drizzle, and a crown of whipped cream. How delightful. Starbucks Rewards, where happiness reigns.
So for those of you who've seen Bridgerton or know of the impact on Bridgerton, this is an ad for the American market. This is an ad for people in this age group that you just saw the protagonist in the ad. And the question, of course, on your minds is it actually effective or not? And let's try to answer that question. And that's one of the reasons why I used this example to start with, because I've got access to all of these metrics for the ad. And obviously, you see tick marks all over there. I'm not going to take you through every bit of every single metric there. I don't want to discuss every single one of them, but just so that you're aware, it had a pretty big impact on non-customers. So, effectively, the summary of whether it is effective or not is that it is incredibly effective. The ad is much more effective than traditional creatives. And could I say it's also much, much faster. This process of creating ideas, taking a client brief, creating ideas, then actually creating animatics, then pre-testing it typically takes between 12 and 14 weeks. In this particular case, the entire process took only 2 weeks. So the question we have to ask ourselves, and by the way, just in case you didn't catch it, the ad was created with generative AI prompts. All of those people have been created through generative AI prompts. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what does this mean for the adoption of this technology and technology in general? How do breakthroughs like these shape our expectations and timelines? This is where we really encounter a fascinating paradox. When a new technology emerges, one like generative AI, we often overestimate what it can achieve in the short run and underestimate its long-term potential. It's captured beautifully by Roy Amara, who had a law named after him, said we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate its effect in the long run, effectively being perhaps unrealistically optimistic in the short run and cautiously pessimistic in the long run. So the question really is, what about generative AI? Well, perhaps I could start off by talking about similar technologies that, well, I shouldn't say similar yet. We've got to see whether that happens or not. But technologies that have created breakthroughs for humanity, have transformed humanity. And as it happens, there are a number of them, but I'm just going to talk about 4 here. The printing press, the steam engine, electricity, the internet. And we've got to understand that when the printing press was invented, it's not as if it had this profound impact on humanity right away. It takes time. It takes a lot of time. What you won't, in fact, believe right away is when I say that it took 150 years for the printing press to have a profound impact on humanity. And in fact, at that time, some of the things that created this delay in impact were really humanity pushing back against such an incredible invention. Something similar happened with the steam engine as well. So as it turns out, to the point that Amara made, the years to profound impact were huge for the printing press, somewhat less for the steam engine, yet 75 years. Somewhat less for electricity, yet still 55 years. Somewhat even less for the internet, but lo and behold, 20 years is what it took to have this profound impact on humanity. So it takes time. So for those of you who are saying, generative AI doesn't do this or that, well, it may take time, but it may also not have the impact. So we've got to be careful in trying to understand what it offers, what it doesn't offer. It could end up the way of the Concorde and the Segway, which, as you know very well, were very exciting inventions, but of course, they didn't lead to much long-term success. So where does generative AI fit in this narrative? Are we overestimating its immediate potential? Are we underestimating its long-term impact? Well, if my opening example is any indication, we may just be at the start of something fairly transformative, both in effectiveness and speed. Certainly in the marketing world, but it's having an impact in every world that you can think of at this stage. But let's look at where it really is having an impact, where it's not having an impact. And so welcome really to this webinar that I'm giving you on generative AI. Well, the first thing I want to do, and this could just be my academic background speaking, but the first thing we have to do is to make sure that we understand what we are talking about when we talk about generative AI. I've had some incredible experiences in my career where, just to give you one incredible experience, and I use the word incredible quite purposefully, which is hearing a business leader talk about the use of AI in their organization when they were effectively using Excel. So we've got to be very careful what we mean when we say generative AI. And the best way to think about this is to think about three different areas that are loosely linked, but also part of the same general foundational discipline. Statistics, advanced AI such as machine learning, and generative AI. These three things do very different things, but they are linked, of course. Statistics is about understanding why something is happening. Advanced AI, machine learning does a lot of prediction, and generative AI creates new data. It's very, it's got very different purposes. Best explained, if I could, with a very simple example. Statistics tries to answer the question, which customers are most likely to buy what from us and why? Advanced AI, which is machine learning, answers the question, what's the best real-time offer to make for this particular customer? And that's all about personalization. Generative AI is all about what should we say to this customer. So when you read the narratives in the press or from from your business partners, you'll see them confusing between these three elements all the time. Generative AI does not tell you what best real-time offer to make for this particular customer. But what it does do is it helps us work out what should we be saying to this customer and how should we be saying it. So let's be clear, this is what generative AI really does. When you go across the spectrum of these three different technologies, which are all, I would say, part of the suite called artificial intelligence, they're really purposefully meant for two very specific uses for business. The first one is revenue growth, and revenue growth can happen because of a variety of different impacts, such as on margin, on share of market, share of customer, et cetera, et cetera. And the second purpose for these technologies is cost reduction, which could happen through productivity, efficiency, automation, and other different ways. So it's really about revenue growth and cost reduction. Across the board, there's lots of estimates of how these different technologies are going to impact revenue growth and cost reduction. And there are many estimates of the value at stake from these technologies. An aggregation of that value is what I'm going to present to you, just to give you a sense of where we are at with these three different technologies. Statistics, $9.5 trillion. Advanced AI, $5.8 trillion. Generative AI, $1.2 trillion. Now, you might just go, well, that seems like only 1/9, 1/10 of what statistics can offer. Why are we barking on about generative AI? Just so that everybody is aware, statistics has been around for a very long time. Generative AI really in its current form, although the technology has been developed over a number of years, in its current form was introduced in January 2023. So it's really a baby at this stage. The fact that it's even the fact that we're creating these estimates of $1.2 trillion indicates that there's something fairly big occurring here. So we need to now get into where it actually has an impact, where it creates risks, and that's what I want to do now. Before I go there, just want to ask you a question, which you don't have to answer, but it's a question that you just need to answer, which is, have you tried generative AI? Hopefully, every one of you who's in this webinar has tried generative AI on a variety of different platforms. Very likely, a lot of you have tried it on ChatGPT, but of course, it's available now in Meta and Gemini and lots of different places. The fact is, AI at work is absolutely here. This is a report from 2024 from Microsoft and LinkedIn. Employees want AI. They're already using AI. And leaders, of course, looking for a path forward. You can't really avoid the fact that people are already using AI. In fact, in this study, what they found was that 75% of knowledge workers are using AI at work today. And 46% of users started using it less than 6 months ago. So there's a real uptake. And in fact, what they're saying is it's really paying off. Helps them save time, focus on their most important work, be more creative, enjoy their work more. Well, that's fabulous. So it really is up to business leaders to work out how to create opportunities for people to use AI at work. And if you don't create those guardrails, then they're going to continue doing what they do. Now, there are three different types of people in this world as far as generative AI is concerned. And when I say AI now onwards, it really is about generative AI. The first type is the AI skeptic in this world. Who are the AI skeptics? Well, they're the ones who love talking about how nobody knows how AI works. True, it might be, but it's having an impact. You just saw an example of that. I'm going to show you a few more examples. AI is hitting a hard ceiling it can't pass, so this is it. Well, that too is not totally true. Of course, if that doesn't work, if they can't talk about the articles that they've read, they will talk about how Air Canada had to honor a refund policy that a chatbot made up. So therefore, chatbots are bad, AI is bad. Well, when was the last time you tried to call a service provider, and I won't name a particular service provider, and how long did you have to wait for the call to be picked up by a human being? And then was the problem solved or not? And of course, the story about the finance worker in Hong Kong, who, the company called Arup, which is an engineering company from the UK, had to pay out $39 million after a video call with deep fake chief financial officers. One could say, well, AI is really, really bad because people can create these deep fakes. That actually is somewhat true. But in this particular instance, the fact that a finance worker could pay out $39 million after a video call with a deepfake doesn't indicate to me in any way that it's AI that's the big problem. It indicates to me that they don't have the right processes in place. So let's be very, very careful when you've got all these bunch of AI skeptics saying, this is bad, that is bad, that is bad, and the whole world is coming to an end. And in fact, on that point, let me actually take you through some estimates from AI experts on the probability that we're going to see doomsday because of AI. In fact, if some of you who come from a technical background, and you would know that an icebreaker in Silicon Valley is to talk about what your P-doom is. What is P-doom? P-doom is essentially your estimate of the probability of doomsday happening because of AI. Well, on the left-hand side, there are a bunch of experts in AI who've provided their P-dooms. And starting from, of course, Yann LeCun, who's the chief AI guy at Meta/Facebook, and you go up the list, and that goes from 0% P-doom through to 100% P-doom. So what this chart really tells you is that these AI experts have views that go from 0 to 100. And effectively, what that tells you is that nobody really knows what the actual number is. At this stage, we're not seeing much damage happening, and I can imagine that it could happen. So I'm not denying that at all. There are real risks, and we'll talk about the real risks. But at this stage, the number is actually closer to the bottom than it is to the top. But of course, there's lots of people making noise about it being much more towards the top. Now, I'm not in the category, you might be thinking, look, this guy seems to be in the category of AI believers. And AI believers are the ones that think that it is going to change literally everything. You can see all those articles, and I can produce another 100 articles for you that says how AI is going to change absolutely everything. Of course, when you read those articles, by the way, the first thing you'll notice is that they're talking about advanced AI, machine learning, and generative AI together. But of course, there's a lot of, optimism about how it's going to change every single thing, and we're just going to be turning into some kind of robots, or effectively, there's just going to be robots running around on Earth, and we're not going to be anywhere at all. I don't think any of these extreme views are particularly useful for you. What you need to do is extract out the good from each one of those and start thinking about, well, where are the real benefits and where are the real risks? Because there are elements of both in generative AI. So I like to call myself much more of an AI agnostic. I think it's very useful. I think there's good to it. I think there's also bad to it. Let me just take you through some examples of good and the bad. The first one I want to start with is a study that some of you folks might be aware of, others might not be aware of. And this is a study that was done by BCG in collaboration with Wharton and Harvard and other places. And effectively, what they found was that consultants using generative AI do better, and especially underperformers do much better. The study is called Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier, and these are the bunch of co-authors, but I just want to show you the results in very brief. First of all, those who did not use AI, the quality of their outputs was far less, and significantly so, than the folks who used AI to do the task that they were given. You might sort of wonder what that task was. Well, I'll talk about that task in a little bit. But what was really remarkable about this study was that they measured the base capabilities of the people in the study. And this was an experimental study where people were assigned to different groups using Gen AI, not using Gen AI in a random fashion. So it was a true experiment in that sense. But they measured the base capability of these participants before they participated in the experiment. And what was remarkable about this study was the fact that it led to a 43% improvement in the people who were in the bottom half, so below the medium in terms of base capabilities to start with. The improvement for the top half was about 17%, but the improvement for the bottom half was 43%. Well, that effectively tells you something about what generative AI can do. It can potentially level the playing field. What a remarkable technology that can actually do that. So for employees, AI does raise the bar, but it also can break the career ceiling. And that's just fabulous to hear. We've got to understand, for example, a bunch of you in the audience come from a non-English speaking background like myself. The impact of something like this on our lives is enormous. We might not talk about it, but just imagine the simple things like writing an email. How many times did you edit an email before writing it to your boss? And now, how many times do you have to edit it? You just have to take the draft, put it in ChatGPT, and it'll give you a polished version of it. You can look over it to make sure that it conveys the meaning, but just simple things like that, you don't have to struggle with anymore. So there are some real benefits there. Where are the real benefits going to be seen? There's lots of different views on this, but generally speaking, the views are that the impact is going to be felt on 4 different aspects. The first one is around content summarization, which is summarizing documents, summarizing large amounts of information that exists in our world. Virtual assistants, expert AIs, we know that, in fact, this is an area that's already quite prominent. And this is effectively a way in which content is summarized for people. A great example in the local context is what Telstra is doing with one-sentence summaries. One-sentence summary is effectively giving a one-sentence summary to people in Telstra about a customer's recent history and status with the company. That, of course, helps efficiency, that it helps quality of interactions that they have with the customer. Ask Telstra is another virtual assistant that Telstra has created. There's lots of examples of these virtual assistants, but content summarization, which is what this really is all about, is a big area where generative AI is having a big impact because it can take lots of text and summarize it in a very concise and fabulous way. I use it all the time to summarize a paper that I've received for review, and it's very helpful for me to do because I get a quick summary and then I can start reading up the paper. The second area, which is fairly big, is content creation. Remember that generative AI creates data. It creates text, it creates images, it creates videos, creates voice messages. So it creates a lot of data, and unstructured data in particular. And so that content creation aspect is where it is going to have a big impact. Here are just 4 different uh, products that are available out there. I use, for example, HeyGen all the time to create videos for my classes, as well as for other aspects. We're going to see an example very quickly. And so turning text to video, turning text to images is something that you can do really quickly with generative AI. Let me give you just one example of creating a video from text. In fact, from something as simple as taking a URL from an Amazon site for L'Oreal's, one of L'Oreal's products. In this case, it's a L'Oreal's Men Expert Anti-Fatigue Cream. And so very, very simple example. You'll see this in HeyGen. Drop a link to your product listing to instantly generate promotional video content. So I just dropped a link there and I asked it to generate a video. It gives you some options on what you would like to do. Let's have a quick look at the video to see what it can do in, and let me just emphasize here, in just about 3.5 minutes, which is what it took for me to produce this video. Let's have a look at the video and then I'll talk about that video after that.
Ever wondered how life could be with smoother, firmer skin? A few months ago, my skin felt tired and dry. The signs of aging were clear. I needed a change. That's when I discovered L'Oreal Paris Men Expert Power Age 24H Revitalizing Anti-Aging Moisturizer. This isn't just any moisturizer. It's packed with hyaluronic acids that intensely hydrate and firm up your skin. Day by day, I felt my skin becoming stronger and smoother. The 100 milliliter format meant I had plenty to keep my skin revitalized. Don't miss out. Get yours today and experience the change.
So that took about 3.5 minutes to create. And I've got a video for Melbourne Business School as well. I'm not going to show it to you because I could get into trouble with my boss, so I don't want to do that. But of course, you can create these videos very, very quickly. There's many other ways in which you can create video content. I have to say this, which is, as an educator, I think generative AI has the potential to disrupt my industry massively. There's no question in my mind that if we don't start thinking about this today, we are going to be in trouble 10 years from now. We are going to have a Kodak moment, and I am making that bold prediction that this is going to happen to our industry. I already showed you an example from Brand Comps, and they're creating these ads for a number of different clients already. The third area where generative AI is having an impact is, of course, through conversational AI copilots. And these are effectively chatbots, but chatbots that you can actually speak with. This is a chatbot that I use because I've got an account with Wells Fargo, and I found it extraordinarily good because it actually does produce fairly accurate information, and very, very impressed with it. The fourth area where generative AI is having an absolutely massive impact is in coding productivity. When I say coding productivity, I actually mean software coding. It's having a huge impact. And I can tell you that from personal experience that the ability of generative AI to help people who code, software developers, is just absolutely huge. I now can do things that I couldn't do before so very easily. And of course, the question arises, is it accurate? Spectacularly so as well. In fact, there was a study done by McKinsey Digital, and it showed that the impact in terms of task completion time using generative AI on code documentation is about 50%, on code generation is about 35 to 45%, on code refactoring is about 20 to 30%. Still pretty tough to get its impact on high complexity tasks, but most of the work that we do is not very, very complex. And so therefore it can have a pretty big impact on the work that we do. Any people in the room that have done software coding, I'm sure when I ask you the question, do you like documenting your code? The answer to that question is almost always totally don't like documenting code. Imagine if you've got an assistant who's able to document your code very, very quickly and actually accurately too. How much more joy does that give you in your lives? So big, big impact there.
Ujwal, may I interrupt for just one moment?
Of
We've
course.
got some questions coming through from our audience.
Yeah.
And Patrick asked this question, which is particularly relevant at this point. His major concern is about giving away data or information to an AI system black box that we have no control over. And he
Yeah.
wonders, can a company implement a fully private AI generative system?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Katrina. Thanks very much, Patrick, for that question. There are two ways in which you can address the issue. The first one is to create your own private LLM. The problem, of course, is that it will have a lot of private, confidential, internal information, but it won't have the ability to leverage the massive amount of information that exists outside of your company. So what a lot of organizations are doing is creating this internal system, but what they're finding is that it's not as effective and productive as the large language systems that exist outside of your organization. There is another way in which you can actually leverage the large language models that exist outside of you, or the data that exists outside of your organization, by creating what are called RAGs, by creating a mechanism where your information stays confidential, but there's a way in which you can retrieve the information that's confidential and then marry it up with the information that's much more public in an LLM to produce what you're looking for. So the RAG system, of course, is one way in which you can do it. There's different ways in which you can think about it, fine-tuning, etc. So the risk of this is being mitigated, can be mitigated, and you want to think about trying to use these RAG systems. Of course, I can imagine, having spoken with some business leaders, what they're still worried about is that will OpenAI have access to this? OpenAI doesn't seem like an organization that I can totally trust. But of course, you can work through your Microsoft Azure methods as well. Those are the kinds of platforms that you could use to be able to provide yourself with the confidence that this information isn't going to disappear. So there's lots of different organizations that are trying to create these guardrails where your information stays with you. Even in the brand comms case that I talked about, there's a lot of confidential marketing information that clients want to be able to upload to create effective advertising. And we've created a mechanism by which that can actually be implemented. So I think there are mechanisms. The concern is legitimate, but there are mechanisms to mitigate this issue.
Thanks, Ujwal. We have another question. What strategy should be taken if you're working in industries that are highly impacted by AI?
So there are two different ways you want to think about it. One is you need to think about it in terms of what you should be doing. And second is you should be thinking about it in terms of your business. But I'm going to stick with the former. We in fact do talk about what a business should be doing, but that will take a much longer time than this short webinar. What you should be doing, I'm going to speak about just in a little bit. So why don't we just stay patient for the answer to that question? Yeah?
Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Now, I talked about all the positives. I do want to talk about the risks that exists. So the first thing I want to talk about is that generative AI has a great way to make us fall asleep at the wheel. And why is that the case? Well, there's a study done by a researcher at Harvard, and I'll talk about that study in a little bit. But you just think about it intuitively. If you're subcontracting your writing to ChatGPT, and writing is how you think, how you structure your thoughts, then if everything is being subcontracted, then are you also subcontracting your thinking? Will it lead to long-term cognitive decline? So these are issues that you want to think about. But in this particular case, in this study, what they found was that people who were using ChatGPT compared to people who weren't using ChatGPT, when they were given a new task, people who were using ChatGPT struggled with the new task. And the results are right here. The control condition is where they had absolutely no access to generative AI, and you can see the impact already. The blue box tells you the percentage of people who provided a correct response in the experimental task when they were not using generative AI. When they had used generative AI previously, they had become dependent on generative AI. So when generative AI was taken away, they couldn't do the task as well as they could do otherwise. So there are some real concerns. There are also some concerns about where it can be helpful and where it is not helpful. So previously, when I've described the impact of generative AI on BCG consultants, it was actually for a specific task, which was for creative product innovation. For a task such as creative product innovation, it is fabulously good. On the other hand, in the same study, what they found was that it wasn't very good for business problem solving. And in fact, what was even worse was that the impact on the underperformers, the bottom performers, was disproportionately greater for the business problem solving task. So the impact, the upside was huge, but the downside was also much greater for the bottom performers. So we've got to think really hard about what generative AI is right for, what it isn't. And let me just add a caveat to what I'm saying right now. This study was done a year ago, and so things have moved along. Even for business problem solving, you can start seeing some much better results now. This is one of the things with generative AI. It's a pretty difficult world because things are changing every day. As you know very well, ChatGPT came out with a new model just last week. And so things are changing all the time. And so even with this particular difference in tasks and its performance on different tasks, things are changing. Luckily, things are changing for the better in terms of its ability to do these tasks. Let me point out a second problem. There are lots and lots of risks. Let me point out a second problem, which is best illustrated with an example. And this is an example where I talked about how, generative AI is great in terms of creating content. Let's get it to create personalized emails for job applicants, for example, in this particular instance. And the prompt I would use is, draft a personalized email response to job applicants for a software engineering position. So I don't have to actually go through a long list of different ways in which I write these emails. And let's just see the difference that comes up. And I've, of course, highlighted the main difference between the two responses that it gave. The first one was subject: excited about your application for the software engineer role. Dear Jane, thank you for applying for the software engineering position. We're thrilled to have candidates like you bringing both technical expertise and a unique perspective to our team. We value diversity and inclusion as key drivers of innovation. Seeing more women pursue careers in software engineering inspires us, etc., etc. Your experience and skills are impressive, but we really, we're excited. Now let's look at the email that was sent to Arun. Thank you for applying to the software engineer position. Your technical experience and expertise align very well with the needs of our team. We're excited to review your application further. We pride ourselves on fostering a collaborative and innovative environment where talented individuals like you can thrive. So the email to Jane was much more about how, diversity and inclusion is really valued. The second email was all about how accomplished this person was, and their skills and accomplishments make them a strong candidate for the role. And why does this happen? Of course, this happens because of the training data that is used to create this content. So you've got lots of different risks of generative AI. Of course, these AI biases are fairly well known, and they are of significant concern. Falling asleep at the wheel, I just talked about that problem. I talked about regulatory compliance. That is, I didn't talk about it yet, but regulatory compliance is a huge issue. If you didn't know this, the Australian government has just come out with a whole document on the things that companies have to worry about. Of course, Europe is the place which is furthest ahead on regulatory compliance, and that is a pretty big issue in terms of your companies using generative AI. The fact that we are all extremely dependent on these LLM providers is a pretty big issue, because what happens if one of those LLM providers disappears? What happens to all the modules that you've created within your organization. And of course, one of the risks is hallucinations, which you're all aware about. Let me just say, generative AI is not meant to provide accurate answers. If you're trying to use it to get accurate answers to esoteric questions like how many R's are there in a strawberry, then let me just say you're using it for what it isn't intended to do. But if you're using it to get some ideas to do your work better, then the hallucinations part shouldn't really worry you. I use it, for example, to create minor case studies. So if anybody in the room is one of my students from this year, you would have seen some caselets that I've created. They were created with generative AI. Very, very powerful caselets. I can tell it exactly what to do, create the tension in the case so that at the end we learn much, much better. But if you're trying to use it for things that it's not intended to be used for, and you get some hallucinations, well, surely that is a problem in terms of how you're using it. More broadly, hallucinations are a problem. Sorry, Katrina, did you have a question?
Actually, Junjet has a question, Ujwal, and I'll read the question, but it raises another question for me. The question is, should AI be designed to augment human decision-making and capabilities rather than operate autonomously without human intervention? I guess the question that raises for me is, after what you've just explained, can it operate autonomously without human intervention?
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question. I think, it does have some limitations right now, but I am quietly very confident that in a very short period of time, things like customer service is going to be automated. And, I just don't see that we can continue to operate with the error-prone, very unproductive ways in which customer service is implemented in organizations. Anybody who criticizes chatbots that are AI powered, well, like I said before, I urge you to pick up the phone and call one of your service providers and see how long it takes and see the mistakes that they make. So I'm quietly confident that it is going to automate many of these things. There's going to be delegation. So, for example, well, I'm going to talk about some of those examples in a little bit, but certainly I'm quietly confident that you could allow these things to be autonomous as well. But of course, there are some risks that there may be mistakes along the way, and you've got to be able to recognize those risks that happen, by the way, let me just say, with human beings as well. And if you think that human beings don't make any mistakes, and in your organization nobody ever makes mistakes, well, maybe you want to tell me what that organization is, because I really want to work with you folks, or maybe even work for you folks, because human beings make mistakes, and generative AI is also going to make mistakes. So moving right along, the question that was asked earlier, what should I do? I want to get to that before we close off this webinar. This is an important part of the webinar as well. What should I do? What should you do? Well, the first thing I'm going to advise you to do is to develop an experimental mindset. You just can't not start experimenting with generative AI. It's, you would be surprised at the things that it can actually help you with. When it was introduced in January 2023, for a couple of months, I was going, I don't know. I don't know really what to say in the ChatGPT prompt. And eventually I started using it. And now I use it for many, many things in my work and actually in my life as well. And it's become something that really helps me in terms of being a partner in my life. By the way, that I mean in my work life. I'm hoping that my wife is not listening in on this call, but in any case, it's a partner. It's something that helps me do my work better, and I love it for that, right? So I would call myself a power user because I use it quite often, And there's a study that talks about the rise of the power user and what they reveal about the future. If you look at the survey responses that power users gave, and I've highlighted some of them, I research and try new prompts. I'm always trying different ways to prompt. I regularly experiment with different ways of using AI for different tasks that I do otherwise. Before starting a task, I ask myself, could AI help me with this? So effectively, I'm trying to use it to augment what I do, and I find it very, very powerful in that particular role that it does. So I'd advise you very strongly to get onto it and start using it if you're not already. If you're using it, accelerate your usage. Try to allocate 8 to 10 hours in the first instance to using it for different types of tasks that you do. What should you do otherwise? Well, one way in which you can think about what you should be doing is to think about the different types of tasks that you do and try to understand the risk in the outcomes from those tasks that you do. Low risk, high risk. Think about whether those tasks are very routine tasks or whether those tasks are tasks where you have to demonstrate your intelligence. Those are tasks that you really have to think through. And that allows you to think about the tasks that you can automate, the tasks that you can delegate, the tasks that you can collaborate on, and the tasks that you should absolutely not let go of. I say that, and I've talked about strategy there as a task that you don't want to let go of, where there's intelligence that's demonstrated and it's a high-risk task as well. But as it happens, generative AI has the ability to help you even with strategy, where you can do a lot of scenario planning. You can do a simulation of different scenarios. And so it's very, very helpful. The other thing that I find very helpful about generative AI is to use it as what we call in computer programming as the rubber duck debugging. What is the rubber duck debugging? Rubber duck debugging is effectively to keep a rubber duck right next to you and speak to it about what you're trying to work on. And in fact, it's the act of speaking to it that allows you to generate the answer yourself and debug the code yourself. So use generative AI as a rubber duck, which is a very powerful way in which you can, in fact, perhaps even solve the problems yourself as you start typing prompts into the generative AI prompt window. I've talked about some of the risks. I've talked about some of the benefits, and I've talked about what you should do. Of course, there's a lot of other things you should be doing, but in this brief time period, this is what I could cover. I want to close off by just bringing up a quote from Geoffrey Hinton from 2016. And the quote goes, and if you didn't know who Geoffrey Hinton is, he just won the Nobel Prize for physics this year and is one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence. He's one of the people who, in fact, thinks that AI is very, very dangerous, but he also understands the impact that AI is going to have. And this quote from him effectively says that if you work as a radiologist, you are like Wile E. Coyote in the cartoon. You're already over the edge of the cliff, but you haven't looked down. There's no ground underneath. People should stop training radiologists now. It's just completely obvious, and I say that with that emphasis, that in 5 years, deep learning is going to do better than radiologists. It's from 2016. Geoffrey Hinton, 7 years later, said this. This is from Geoffrey Hinton. This is like 7 years later. Neural nets are comparable with radiologists for many different kinds of medical scans, and I believe that in 10 years, they'll be routinely used to give a second opinion. And maybe in 15 years, they'll be so good at giving second opinions that the doctor's opinion will be the second one. So I think I was off by a factor of 3, but I'm still convinced that I was completely right in the long term. Well, the general advice that I will give you, and of course I use myself, is that don't listen to Nobel Prize winners. Don't listen to Geoffrey Hinton because he was off by a factor of 3. And by the way, he could be off by a factor of 6. We don't know yet. Things are all up in the air. But there is something that's not up in the air. And that is that you can use generative AI to augment your work. And you better start doing it right now. There's a fabulous book by a professor at Wharton who really is a thought leader in this area, Ethan Mollick, the book is called Co-Intelligence. I would strongly advise you to read this book if you haven't already. By the way, I get no commissions at all from this, but I really think it's a powerful book for you to read. It will help you understand how you can augment your work and your life with AI rather than to say it's not good, or rather than to say it's just, everything's going to change. My ending advice to you really is to keep learning. And so please do keep learning, keep moving forward, because there is no real option other than to keep moving forward. So please do keep learning. I've invested in my own learning over the past 2 years because I've effectively understood that if I don't do this, I'm going to be in trouble. And in fact, if I do this, I'm going to be doing much better than I do otherwise. So you've got to keep that in mind as you move forward. And I'm open for any questions. I think we've got a little bit of time for questions, Katrina. So let's do that now.
And I can attest to the fact that I watched Ujwal create that graphic in about 30 seconds using Gen AI, even changing the text, which was seriously impressive. Ujwal, I'm going to get to a couple of questions now. I loved your advice that kind of went along the lines of you've got to start where you're at, not where you think you should be when it comes to generative AI. So just start somewhere, keep curious and do it in your own way.
Yeah.
But I guess Ryan has asked a question about AI adoption for companies on a maturity curve, saying that like there's a general level, there's teams using AI use cases to streamline specific workflows, and then there's an org-wide AI integration. And he wonders, based on your conversations and your experience, where would you say most Australian businesses are today?
That's a pretty hard question to answer, Ryan. Good to have you in the webinar. I know who Ryan is, so former student of mine. Ryan, I think it varies, of course, by sectors. And if you were to ask me where particular companies are, there are companies like Commonwealth Bank that are way ahead on this spectrum. And then there are other companies, which I obviously shouldn't be naming, that are way behind in this regard. I think what really distinguishes these companies is not necessarily the technology that they have, but it's the mindset of the leaders. And in my view, it's companies where the leaders understand the potential of this technology and, in fact, understand not the technical aspects of the technology, but it's what it can do for their organizations. Those are the organizations where you can see a lot of movement, and other organizations you don't. But Ryan, if you were to be asking me, on average, where does Australia sit? I think on average, we're of course, we've got a lot to catch up on. We're not there.
Thank you, Ujwal. Gil has a question too, specifically about Gen AI used with autonomous vehicles, defence, commercial applications, etc. And Gil's interested in the associated risks and benefits for that sector.
Yeah, so these are pretty difficult questions to answer, and I'm not trying to say your question is difficult, Gil, but it is a pretty difficult one. There are a number of significant ethical issues that for the past 10 years, 15 years, we've been talking about in our classrooms, where we've tried to work through, what do you do with autonomous vehicles? What's going to happen if you've got to make a choice between this or that. Of course, as we talk through those number of issues, you already see, that there are cars out there, cabs out there now in California, which are driverless. So certainly the world is moving forward with it. The way I would want us to think about this is, yes, there are significant ethical issues involved in using AI in areas such as autonomous vehicles and defense. But the comparison is not to a scenario where there are no mistakes made at all. the comparison has to be to human beings. And I've got to tell you, you just have to drive on some roads to find out, how bad human beings are at driving. So I think that's the right comparison. I really don't think you would get to a scenario of 100% accuracy, but certainly you would get to a scenario, and I think we're already way beyond it, where you see far more accuracy than otherwise. In fact, there's just a recent study done on diagnoses by doctors, and it showed that generative AI can produce diagnoses that are much more accurate than doctors themselves. And so, there will be algorithmic aversion, which is a very well-known fact with human beings. We're averse to algorithms and products that have algorithms in them, but we really need to be thinking about, accuracy relative to us as human beings. And I certainly know that in many instances, these machines are much more accurate than we are, even if they're not 100% accurate.
Thank you, Ujwal. I'm just sitting here and reflecting. It's like you're my own personal AI tutor, Yoda. I don't know what to call you, but I think I'd rather ask you these questions than pop them into ChatGPT. I have one last question. We have time for one last question in a couple of minutes, and it probably sums up a number of questions. We've seen today examples in the media of the nefarious use of AI impersonating academics and professionals to sell products. And the question is, how do we protect ourselves or our organisations or industry from these practices, and whose role is it?
Thank you very much, Katrina. I think there are two very big questions here. The first one, is effectively we have to understand that this technology exists and this technology can be misused. And so therefore, we've got to create the right processes within our organizations to protect ourselves from these technologies while allowing ourselves to leverage from it. So the great, a fabulous example was what I described earlier with money being taken away. Well, certainly if the company had the right processes, they wouldn't be in this incredibly embarrassing situation of having given away $39 million. We saw that happening with cybersecurity as well. Phishing is a very common scam that exists. Organizations have actually put in place a number of ways in which phishing can be reduced. The other question, which is a much bigger one, which is whose responsibility is it? I think that the answer to that greatly depends on your personal view of whether the responsibility of managing these risks is with the government or is it with individuals and organizations. And so my view on this, of course, as you already would have guessed, is a balance of government and organizations and individuals. It is all of our responsibility to ensure that this does not happen going forward. We have a lot of work to do, but we can do that work. And as a result of which, I think we are going to be better as a society going forward, making sure that we leverage the benefits and mitigate the risks at the same time. It really has been a pleasure, Katrina. I know we're running out of time, but back to you.
Thank you, Ujwal. I think it's like anything, isn't it? If we're worried about the risks, the first step is to educate ourselves, inform ourselves about what's going on, and then make sensible decisions from there. But look, can I just say, everyone, thank you so much for your questions today. We've got through the majority, but not all, and I apologise if we've missed yours. But I think that, Ujwal, you've taken us through real-world examples from across multiple industries and job functions, and it's been hugely insightful. If you have enjoyed today's session and you want to hear more from Ujwal on the possibilities of AI and Gen AI, we're pleased to announce we've got a new 2-day face-to-face Generative AI for Business short course scheduled for next year in March 2025. And we'll send details to all the participants at the end of this program. But today's session is the last for the year. And I just want to say thank you very much to Lindsay Brown in the background for her sponsorship and thinking about how to bring these masterclasses to people in a lunchtime format and give you just a sense of what's happening in our short course programs. It's been a hugely impactful series, and we do thank you all for your questions because you make the program. So being the last session for the year, we wish you a safe and happy holiday period, and we do look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Bye for now.
Thank you.